because people are trusting these institutions, and when they collapse, it creates social instability and riots and that kind of thing, which is kind of a real thing in China.
Right.
But it's kind of, you can justify any kind of regulation, I think, with this sort of, quote unquote externality.
Right.
But that could be one direction.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. And maybe you might decide that disclosure is not enough, right? Because people may not read their disclosures.
Yeah.
So if the government wants us to avoid instability, maybe capital requirements are the way to go.
Yeah, but that's where it gets a bit complicated, because then it kind of intertwines the rationales for banking regulation and for securities regulation. Because as you said, you could say, well, as long as people have disclosure and they're able to measure the risks that they're taking, and there's no implicit or explicit guarantee, then the right incentives should be there, right? People should charge more interest from the riskier intermediaries, and the market should take care of all of this. So that's the challenge here, to say there are some kind of externalities that are not solved by appropriate disclosure under the securities regulation approach. So we also need some sort of substantive banking regulation, like preventing them from having too much leverage, or requiring them to follow prudent lending practice. Well, actually, that probably fits more in Chapter 3, but well, no, I guess
you can't. If you're looking at capital requirements, you have to get into the prudential in terms of the lending, right?
Yeah, so lending concentration requirements, like all of that apparatus of bank-like regulation. So that's also another comment, is you don't want just to look at capital, but you want to look at the whole apparatus of safety and soundness regulation, such as concentration limits and insider lending and all of that kind of thing.
Should I talk about reserves?
Well, reserves are about liquidity. If you think that there isn't a liquidity problem, then reserves just are sort of besides the point, aren't they?
I just think, before I use the capital requirement, I think when the non-lender, when they flee away, they can protect the investor. But after I do some research, I understand the capital requirement, they can just protect the non-bank lender. They do the risk investment on and the non-bank lender from insolvent.
So you're saying that a cash reserve can keep you from being insolvent, right? Mm-hmm. I think his point is that there's two ways to make sure you don't. I mean, having a equity cushion prevents you from being insolvent.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be in cash unless you think there's a liquidity problem.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or I guess if you think that it's too hard to measure the value of the assets, that'd be a different reason to have cash requirements, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
and that's something that I would let you think through. I don't think I have really strong priors on any of that. Although what you told me though raises a different question about what kind of banking regulation might be appropriate here. And it's not just solvency, but another big important aspect of safety and soundness regulation is approval of bank formation and approval of the fit and proper character of the people who start banks and are authorized to run them. So you kind of have to get into the issue of whether people should be licensed to be in that sort of business, especially if the proven tendency in the market is for people to just run away with the money. And so do you want to get into that? But if you start talking about whether bank regulation is appropriate, I think it's almost inevitable that you'll have to talk about these other things, not just capital.
Yeah, I think I like this. I mean, I think this is very helpful because I think you can run through the disclosures into the securities portion, and then you could introduce banking, right? And you could talk about traditional justifications for bank regulation, and that maybe they don't apply so well here because they don't have short-term debt, but that there might be other reasons why you would still, right? It may be a stretch, and that you can talk about why this might be an attractive mechanism or attractive analogy for the government because they can decide, are these good people and do we want to give them a license, right? And so, one of traditionally that's also tied though to the traditional rationale, right? If you're looking at this strictly from the state's perspective,
should we give, the question, whether we should give a license to this person or not,
Yeah.
that's driven by the fact that if they run away, if they crash the bank and run away, then we're going to have to